It's Monday, Labor Day, September
Labor Day.
4th. You should be eating hot dogs and drinking your favorite beverages, and instead you're hanging out with us nerds. um, Tonight we have with us Steve North, who wrote a couple of games for the ZX81 slash Timex Sinclair 1000 just over 40 years ago, right, Steve?
Yeah, I think I did 4 games.
You did 4 games, from what I can tell. Um,
There was
and
a
they,
football game.
yep, there was a football game. There was
There
a,
was one called Miner's Revenge,
mhm.
which is similar to some games that have been written since. Unfortunately, before we came on, you were asking me about the directions about the games,
Yeah,
and I would need another couple of weeks to dig those up. It was only 45 years ago,
right.
I had no idea you guys existed, that anybody was still dealing with it. The original one was called the ZX81. Is that right?
That's right. Well, there was the ZX80 before, but it had a smaller basic ROM, and I think about this, it was still 1K of RAM.
1K. Imagine.
Imagine that, yeah, right. What you could do in a whopping 1K.
Well, yeah. So I remember you couldn't really do any uh, graphics that made it look like it was a person or anything. I
mhm.
remember the football game. I think was X's and O's, right? X against O's.
Yes. Right. Do you remember Stormlander? It says you're trying to make an emergency landing at Denver's
Oh yes, that
Stapleton
was
Airport. Okay.
cool. I didn't
And
remember that one.
and
All right,
then
so that's 3.
there was one called Super Slide, and this was set in the future at the 1988 Olympics bobsled.
Oh, wow. That's the future in
The future
1980.
back then, yes.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
Steve, tell us, your story. How did you get into this? How did you, get what prompted you to get a
I
Sinclair
was,
computer in the first place?
I think it was in the late 70s, maybe the early 80s. When did the ZX come out? Do you remember?
The 81 came out
Yeah,
in 1981. Is that right, Tim?
one. So about 78 or 79, I've been playing around with electronic, soldering things and building things. And um right. And so then I saw this thing advertised from England or something, I think,
Mm-hmm.
about putting this computer together. So I ordered the kit and spent about, 20 hours soldering it and putting it all together. And then I think it was a couple years later, I started writing games for it. And there was a gentleman.
Is it Fred Nackbauer?
That's it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. He contacted me and he said, I would like to represent your games. And so I sent them to him and he represented them. And I can't remember if they sold or what. I think they did sell some.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess the interesting thing is, it was all basic. The programming was in basic. And all I remember is a multitude of if thens, just like the football game you mentioned. It would go through this series of loops, like if run,
Mm-hmm.
then this. If pass, then it would branch over to this. And then if it was the pass, the quarterback drops back. Or does he go off to the right or does he go off to the left? Does he see an open receiver? And by the time I get done with all these loops, there's like 100 of them going straight down. I'm sure that they've improved programming since then. Um, um, and that was just writing in basic. And After that, I started programming in DBase,
Oh, wow.
actually, and that was literally the end of my computer programming career. I wrote some programs in DBase for video rental stores,
Oh, how crazy.
and I had like 5 or 6 video rental stores. And of course, then the really big programmers and software companies came out with really good programs for these video rental stores. And that's when I bowed out of the whole thing. But I remember I had this a little Asian lady that ran a store, and she'd call me every other day. How do you do this? And I sit there and talk to her for 45 minutes. And but anyway, back to the ZX. Literally, I think the Lander one you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
I think that was maybe motivated by the. I'm not sure if Pac-Man was out yet. It wasn't, right?
It might have been the same time.
19,
Yeah,
1980,
and
I
there
think.
was. Yeah, I always loved flying and trying to control things into a particular spot. You brought out the fact that you tried to play the football game and you had a difficulty because you didn't know what keys to hit.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't know what keys to hit. Anyway, it was kind of a side thing that I was doing. Me and my wife had moved out to Los Angeles, and we were in comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I just have always had this little part of me that's kind of logical. And then I have this other part of me that does comedy. And that was when I realized I'll leave the programming to people who are really good at it.
Know what they know what they're doing, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I think my heart was in the right place. The games had a good idea to them, but I don't know if the. I'm sure there's a way to program even in BASIC so you don't go through 150 if ands or if thens.
Well, for
I
the
think I think today it's the same. It's just faster.
Is that right? Well, then I don't feel so bad.
you said
So
you built the kit, right?
yeah, I love building the kit and showing it off to my wife and my daughter. It didn't take a lot to impress them back then. You know, I could do Barb's name, 5,000 times on the screen, and she go, "Oh wow, that's amazing."
Yeah. And so what prompted you to write these games?
Well, we originally lived in Colorado, before that in Chicago. And when we were in Colorado, we got in an improv group and started performing. And like idiots, we moved out to Los Angeles to make it in show business. After all these years, I'm glad we did because we had a lot of success and still do. But like the other part of me, the part of me that's logical and wants things to make sense,
Mm-hmm.
to put the computer together and wrote the programming. It was like my grounding, because everything was crazy out here doing show business, and you would be out of work for 3 months, and then you'd suddenly have so much work you couldn't even sleep at night, and then you'd be off for 8 months, and it was crazy. And I think the computer stuff was like my keel, it kept me sort of in touch with reality.
That's pretty cool. So I played, like I said, mentioned I played your games, ran through them a little bit earlier. I'm in Buffalo. I don't know if you're familiar with the Buffalo Bills.
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay. So
My sympathies, by the way, yes.
exactly. Right.
Well, listen, I grew up with the Chicago Bears.
Oh, there you
So,
go.
so I know what it's like to spend 20 years without winning a championship.
We still have it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just show you this, and hopefully there we go.
Sinclair, right? That was the guy. Okay, look at that.
Yeah.
1983. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it was a few years ago.
So you could play a demo.
Yeah, I think. Oh yeah, right. So the demo was the Falcons versus the Cowboys. And you know what it's doing here is it's, as near as I can tell, you know, we're getting the play, and that little.
Why are there all those pluses at only one circle?
Yeah, exactly. Right, right. I think you only see, in essence,
How far it goes before it.
Yep.
You see in the defense?
You know what? Now that I look at it, it is possible that because of the limitations of the memory and everything, I didn't show the other players on the offensive team.
Right.
And so the defense would be put on at random in many different randoms. And then the one circle was the guy with the ball. And when he hit a plus sign, he'd be tackled. Let's see, Buffalo play 1 through 4, pass, or what does F mean? God.
I'm not sure what. Field goal, maybe? Field goal attempt? I think that's what it might be.
Yeah, right.
I just want to.
Well, ready for kick to New York.
Just want to point out the accuracy of this simulation, however, you know, in that Buffalo's already on the defensive. They made no particular gains. And it does not take long for New York to score.
Oh, there it goes. Right.
There it goes. Exactly. A touchdown against Buffalo.
Wow. Sorry, I didn't, you know.
Completely accurate simulation here. I want you to know.
Oh, talk about a limited amount of memory. Look at that.
Right, this is all done in 16K.
Right.
And I looked at the code. Let me switch to this emulator that I've got running. Stop this so I get distracted by it. Yeah, I'll switch to that emulator, and we can. This is the little splash screen that Fred created for you.
Oh, right.
Mr. Snorth.
Oh, that's right, Mr. Snorth. Oh, is he still around?
Well, and this address, you know, 19133 Oxnard and Tarzana. You're not in Tarzana anymore, right?
No, we're in Woodland Hills, which is about just two towns west of Tarzana.
This probably will not get forwarded to you if I send you a postcard. All right. There we go. Press any key to continue. Yeah.
So, Miner's Revenge, Stormlander 3, Super Slide, bring a chance to bring home the gold, get the stars, avoid all else. Oh, so yeah, that was like you had to avoid all these obstacles on the course.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting.
Simple. Yeah. Stormlander, land your van, the zaniest storm since airplane.
And yet there's no humor in this game.
Puzzle which will challenge both luck and logic. Be careful. That was I loved Miner's Revenge because you would dig down one square.
Okay.
And you would either then get to keep digging, or you would run into an obstacle, or you'd find gold.
Yeah.
Or you'd get an instruction that you had to go 2 left and 3 down or something.
Okay. Well, we'll have to figure this one out. Like I said, there's no help here on the keys, so I'm going to bring up Stormlander because I thought that was pretty.
That should be.
I'm going to do the demo. And this was not terrible for, the 81. I mean, you
Yeah.
did you had effective use of graphics here.
Huh.
You can see the altitude, the current speed, the distance,
Oh, yeah.
flaps, um, and then you've got, this running score on the lower right. And it doesn't take long for the demo to land the airplane. It wasn't quite clear to me at the end if the airplane crashed, or if it was successful landing, because
Um,
once it does land in the demo, this view switches to sort of
oh,
a side view of the airport. You'll see it in in a little bit.
what a riot.
Oh.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, yeah. It's not
So,
terrible. I mean, like all ZX81 games.
well, I
Right, so
appreciate
here's the
that.
side view, right? And you can see this little black
Oh, look at
thing
that.
going,
There's actually terminals.
yep, TWA.
TWA
Oh, it
doesn't
changed.
exist anymore.
Yeah. I'm assuming DI stands for Denver International.
Oh,
That back then?
Denver International, because I lived in Colorado, probably.
I guess so.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, that's amazing.
Isn't that crazy?
So, where were you able to get these games?
Well, someone um back in around 1999, I think, got them from Fred and archived them on a web page
Oh,
that is actually still up. And so then I took them and put them on this website called archive.org, which is a place that stores copies of web pages and all kinds of other stuff. A lot of vintage computing people use it.
but would I be able to go there and
Oh
download?
yeah, actually you could go to your let me share the screen again. So I've been building this website about the Timex Sinclair world, as it were, for a bunch of years. And you may recognize the name of this production company.
Yeah, that's still our production company.
Exactly. I noticed that.
Brook Forest is a very small town, about 10,000 feet in the mountains of Colorado.
Oh, okay.
And that's where we lived just before I mean, it was ridiculous to live up there. I mean, it took us all day just to get to town and do laundry and go back. And in fact, me and my wife used to go to a ranch and we would buy a cord of wood,
Mhm.
firewood, and drive down to Denver, which was about an hour from where we were.
Okay.
And when my wife was pregnant with our daughter, she would knock on the door and they would open the door and see this pregnant woman and we'd go, would you like to buy some firewood? And they would just eat it up. And we sold a lot of firewood that way.
So each of these games is downloadable, and actually they're all in one package. Even though I've listed them separately here, they're all in one package. So
So it's timexsinclair.com.
yes, it is. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I've
And
got a
then
little bit of
product?
information. And for instance, these games were mentioned in these two articles in I don't know what magazines those were. Let's see. Buyer Shopper's Guide to Software. That looks like Timex Sinclair user from December of '83. And this is
Wow.
probably Sync of August of '83. Yep. A couple ads. I did some screen captures here so that, folks who are interested in these things can get some rough idea.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, some ads in, there was after Timex, left the business, there was a bunch of sort of really sophisticated newsletters / magazines, and there's this one called Sinclair User Magazine, I think. Some is what it was. They were out of Gainesville. There was a user group in Gainesville, Florida, And
Because they're selling like hotcakes.
there we go. Oh, here's the ad. This is what I wanted to show you. Yes. There we
And
go.
this is what Fred put in.
Yep.
Okay, Stormlander 3, Super Slide,
Yeah.
FX Football, and Miner's Revenge. Wow. Originally sold at $12.95 each. Now you can get all 4 of them for
All
14.
4.
Already they were already I was being discounted.
Only took 2 years.
Yeah, right. Wow. Well, that's great to see that stuff.
And
You
so,
know, I suppose it's just, logic writing these games.
Mhm.
I did the same thing with DBase until I finally realized I am not a great computer programmer. And I gave it up for all the comedy we do.
and so I see that you're a comedy coach now.
Well,
Yes.
we do about 4 different things.
Okay.
I coach people on Zoom all over the world. I have workshops on Zoom. I also have a live workshop here in Los Angeles at a nightclub. And we also manage about 15 performers.
Oh, wow.
And we still perform sometimes, but, just in shows that our students are in and stuff like that.
Okay.
And that's what I was doing really when I was writing these games, just starting comedy. And like I say, it was kind of a sane keel for me because Los Angeles is so crazy. Not Los Angeles, but the comedy world. And
Yeah.
there's just there's no sense to it. And it soothed me to have X plus Y equals Z, and things that always performed the same way when you did them. I mean, I don't know what else to say because, it was 45 years ago.
It was right. I know. I mean, some of us were kids and some of us were.
Yeah. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you guys all have Timex Sinclairs and
Yeah, everybody here does, right?
and you use them?
Well, so yeah, let me tell you a little bit about that, Steve. Like I said, I've been doing this website building this website for a bunch of years, and when I started, I kind of had in mind the fact that other vintage computer people, had a big presence on the internet. Like, you could always find stuff about the Apple II and the Ataris and the Commodores and whatnots, right?
Right. Commodores.
And the Timex Sinclair 1000 was my first computer.
Yeah, it was before all of those.
And I stumbled across some newsletters and some really small websites a few years back, and I thought, oh, this stuff needs to be preserved and put into one location where people can find it. And so I thought, if 2 or 3 people find it useful, that would be a wild success. And so I've spent a lot of time over the past I want to say about 8 or 9 years now, just like tracking everything down that I can, newsletters and tapes and hardware and whatever, and scanning it or digitizing it or whatever, taking photos of it.
Well, let me interject with a possible embarrassing question for me.
Yeah.
Did you find other games that were written at the same time that just made mine seem ridiculously simple or something?
No. So the football game that you wrote kind of reminded me of those little handheld football games that we used to have back in the 80s.
Oh yeah, right.
You remember those? And I thought, I thought you did a good job on all of these things. I mean, Super Slide is no walk in the park. Even the demo is is pretty challenging.
But you're
No.
just moving left to right in that, aren't you?
Yeah, except it goes by pretty fast
Oh, I
because,
see.
you know, it's a bobsled, right? And, you know,
Yeah.
you do actually get some speed in that program. You know, it goes by pretty quickly. So you know, I did this, and then I started reaching out to people. Do you remember Zebra Systems? They sold stuff,
Vaguely,
right? So I
yes.
reached out to Stuart, who ran Zebra, and after a short bit, Stuart said, you know, we should host a Zoom session. And I was like, all right, cool, let's do that. And we hosted a Zoom session, and something like 40 people showed up.
Wow.
Yeah. And after that, I was like, oh, well, I guess, you know, I guess I'll host some Zoom sessions. So I did.
Yeah.
And there's a regular group. There's, you know, 11 of us here tonight, and this is a sort of regular number. It's like between 11 and 20,
Yeah.
depending upon, I mean, you know, it's a holiday right now.
Yes.
And like after two or three of those, I got, you know, a message from somebody in Europe saying, you know, 9 p.m. your time is like 5 or 4 a.m. our time. Could you do something once in a while? And it's like, oh, all right. So we started doing Sunday afternoons to make it convenient for the Europeans. And
Right.
again, you know, the list of names I see here today who have showed up are people that also show up on Sundays. So twice a month now. And I think we've been doing this. This is our third year. This started sort of in the middle of the pandemic.
Well,
And
bless you for doing this.
you know, and it's awesome because I didn't really get to participate in, you know, user group meetings. User groups were a big thing back in the 80s, you know, and I didn't really get to participate in them then. And now I get to participate in one in, you know, twice a month.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And then you know,
The
the fact that we get together and that we can, you know, talk to each other, that has led to you know, all sorts of different activities. Like Tim Swenson, you know, has been publishing sort of this newsletter, you know, every so often. And now more people know about Tim's newsletter, and Tim's, you know, doing some machine language programming. He was working on a program to sort of move your cursor around on the ZX81 like a mouse. Uh, and we have an email list where people talk about this kind of stuff. And Tim was, you know, asked for some help like a couple days ago, and within a day, I think it was someone from Argentina, you know, answered him back and said, "Oh, you need to put in," or maybe was it you, Ryan?
Yeah.
It was Ryan who said, "Oh, you need to put in an org statement in order for this to, you know, compile properly," and boom, you know. And you know, Tim's in on the West Coast like you are, and Ryan's in the middle of New Mexico
The
or
hotbed
Albuquerque.
of the hotbed of Timex users.
Right. And so one of the other things that we've discovered is that there's a guy who's not here tonight, Adam. It was somehow we discovered that Adam and Ryan and another guy, Carl, and another guy, John, are all in Albuquerque. So they get together like in person
Oh, cool.
every, you know, so often. I think
So
they go
what
to
do you
Adam's
know
house.
about the gentleman that promoted my games?
Well, Fred died a number of years ago from
Oh
cancer,
no.
apparently. Yeah.
Oh,
And he went on he went and did some other really cool stuff. He wrote programs for the PC. He got into like tube audio equipment, designing it.
ah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I remember him. He had a lot of energy.
I can tell just by the output, right? So like
Yeah,
he did
yeah.
your software. He started a magazine called Sinkware
Huh.
News, which
And
was
he was in Canada, right?
he was in Canada. Yep, yep.
Okay.
And actually, one of the folks here tonight, Paul ended up with the very tail end of stuff that had been sent to Sinkware News. Like one of the last guys to work on it came over to Paul's house with a box and said, "Here, take this stuff." And Paul held on to it for, what do you say, 35 plus years, Paul?
At least.
Yeah. And it made its way to me where I was able to scan it, and there was a ton of tapes. And I was able to digitize those tapes. So there's been a lot of activity.
So one thing that happened though is when I was writing all these games,
Yeah.
using that part of me that I was not using in performing and comedy and stuff. So later, like I have this kind of best-selling book that came out in 2020 called How to Kill in Comedy.
Yeah.
And the middle third of it are all formulas to create jokes.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's, I think that part of me moved in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I could show you a link, I think, from my book.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen.
Feels like, should I start chatting and post the?
You can do that. Yeah, you can post it in chat. Mm-hmm.
Let's see if I even have it. Let's see. Yep, there it is. It's a little long, I apologize. But it's a link to Amazon, and you can either get the ebook or a soft cover book.
Okay.
If anybody's interested in comedy or what a previously struggling programmer does when he's in comedy. So let's see. Yeah, there's not a whole lot I can tell you about. I was doing it as a side issue. And then when Fred decided to represent them, then I really tried to get serious. And that's when I realized I wasn't a great programmer. I was very logical and I was able to do those games, but I could never get up to the level of probably all you guys who are, really more technically oriented. And so, but I did carry on, like I say. Wow. About the second year I was here, boy, we sat down and used DBase code to write, like I said, a code for video rental stores.
Right.
And that just lasted about 3 years until, again, I realized I can't service these people. Plus, I don't know if you remember DBase, but you constantly had to update it.
Mm-hmm.
And they just, the average, video store rental person just couldn't deal with that. And I would get calls in the middle of the night. How do you, update this database and that database? And I finally got down to one video store. And I was pleading with this woman to buy a different software so that I wouldn't have to talk to her every night at 3 a.m.
You basically outlined the whole area of enterprise software, where the companies that survive are the ones who, decide, yeah, we'll sign up to all that support crap that we have to do.
Yeah, right.
Because no one else wants to do it. Right.
That's right. Yeah, I couldn't obviously compete with big companies, and so I gracefully withdrew.
That's funny.
And that was it for me. It started in late 70s, and by 85 I was done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, we know that feeling.
But I really had a good time when I was programming. There were no computers when that came out, as I remember it. It was the only computer you could own.
Well,
you could afford.
It was, afford. There were other computers. There was, the Apple, which was like, $1,000.
Right.
Luxury.
There was also the S100 Bus World.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah, because I think it was like $100 to order the kit and everything.
Even an S100 system was cheap either.
No.
No, they were $1,000 plus.
So in late 81, I went downtown Hayward and I looked at the bite shop for Apple II at $1,200. Went to Computerland, they had the VIC-20 for $400.
Oof.
My friend bought a Coco for $600. I bought the ZX81 for $250.
Okay.
Mm.
So there were others out there, but it was definitely the cheapest and most affordable. And I did not do the kit because, as you guys know, I don't do hardware.
Yeah, I was very proud of myself when I put it together. And I remember when I turned it on the first moment, and I was shocked to see the screen turn on. And I forget what it said. I think it said
It's a little
Sinclair.
K.
Yeah, 1K, 1K.
Yeah, a little.
So yeah.
That's cool, Steve. That's really cool. So I'll send you a link for I think 81 is probably the emulator that you want to use, and the link so you can download your very own copies of your own software.
Thank you. You know, I have them, but they're on video. No,
Like
they're on
cassette tapes?
cassette.
Oh, really?
And I wouldn't even know how to get the stuff off the cassette.
Are they the cassettes that that Fred produced, or were they
Yeah.
okay, so do they have like, did he make any special labels or anything for them?
Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
they're like, yeah, I mean, pretty much what you saw
okay.
on the advertisement of
Okay.
the four games.
Well, maybe the inserts have instructions, if there's any insert.
Inserts, there are no inserts. There aren't even any excerpts. There's nothing. I just have these cassettes. And I have no idea how you would transfer the ones and O's out of the cassette onto something that you could use, but it'd be a lot easier to just go to this website.
Yes, yes.
That's because it's already been done, apparently, right?
Yep. Well, and to your point, Steve, we in this case we have an embarrassment of riches because the Sinclair community was so big in England that there's a bunch of folks who've written software that you record, you play a cassette into your computer into a program like Audacity, which is a wave editor, a wave file editor, and then you save that, and you can run one of several programs that will convert that into a file that can run in the emulator.
Yeah, because as I remember it, you put these cassettes into basically the equivalent of a hard drive, but it's not a hard drive.
It was a tape player. Yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't just a normal tape player.
It could have been.
Yeah, you could use regular tape players. I mean, there was
All right.
this model tape player.
Some computers had proprietary connections, but they were generally just a tape player at heart. Right?
Oh.
Yeah.
And the Sinclairs are famous for just letting you use, cassette player that was quite common to have in some households already.
Yeah.
So what do you guys do with your Timex computers? Do you just fill me in on what you do with them?
Hold doors open.
Yes, the classic.
So
For me, it's a way of, so I don't do programming as a job, but I like to do it on the side. So it's a way of getting out those programming urges on a machine I've known for years. I kind of want to explore more. There's a lot you can dig deep into. A year ago, I got into how to use the floating point calculator and wrote a paper on that after going through the ROM disassembly numerous times and various articles. And that was kind of fun to tinker with and get it to work.
So do you find that it's simpler programming than, like C or something? Or
Actually, there is a C compiler for the ZX81. I've been using it to do another program. Just working on it the other day.
cool.
And so eventually I'll have it done. I've been working on it, planning on it for about 6 months or more now, but little by little it'll get done, but it's all written in C. So for the ZX81, you can do basic, you can do assembly or C, are the three primary ones.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Hello, Steve. This is Gustavo from Argentina.
Hello, Gustavo.
How are you? Good. I have a question because I am programmer too, but I start with the 2068 machine. I never had a 1000, but my question is, when you create the programs for the Timex, you receive any information or Timex share any information or Sinclair with you regarding the functionality of the operating system or the machine in order to create the program more efficiently or adapt to the machine, or just only try and see what happens?
I didn't totally get what you were asking. You're saying, did I find a way of streamlining the programming somehow, or is that what you were saying?
Yes,
What I think he was getting at was, did you talk direct with Timex and get any help from them on doing your programs? Is that right, Gustavo?
Oh, no.
exactly.
I had no contact at all with them. You know, I just wrote the program. I can't even remember if I wrote the programs. Yeah, I must have written it on the Timex because I didn't have any other computer. I just did it. I wasn't thinking about, could I talk to Timex and could they help me? And, you know, I built the computer and then a year later I started writing BASIC for it. I was real into games, and I still am. And, you know, I think when you play a lot of games, you get a sense for, you know, programming games. And I've noticed over the years that the basic 4 games that I wrote come in different shapes over and over and over again. Like Miner's Revenge, you can find about 8 or 10 games where you dig down beneath the earth and run into this obstacle or that obstacle, and then you hit a bomb and you explode, or you and of course there have been billions of NFL games, football games, and the one about the bobsled is just very similar to, wow, I mean, so many games where you're going down a channel and you have to dodge this and dodge that, or hit that for points. So I think they're basically main themes, all of them. You know what I mean? I mean, they're not games like, can you fit a penny into a quarter, or, you know, I mean, they're just the one thing that I've been feel really good about them is that they keep coming out in new forms. You know, I mean, how many? I mean, look at Space Invaders. It's just that's all the skiing and bobsled and, you know, all the games that come out. They're basically follow the same pattern. They're a lot more sophisticated, of course, but I think that's what Fred liked about my games is that he said, as I remember it, they hit everybody's nerve. That, you know, everybody wants to play football, everybody wants to dig and find unexpected things or land a moon lander. So I guess that's why he picked my games to promote. And really, if you think about it, they're the equivalent games today, except hugely more exaggerated in their, you know, their capabilities, you know.
And are you using the original Timex or Sinclair machine, or use an emulator or a big machine to create that?
No, I just use the Timex Sinclair that I built.
Wow.
Yeah, I built, I had one of the first ones that came out. I soldered everything together, put it together. I was shocked when it turned on and worked. And then I just started writing BASIC on it.
Right. No, and also especially the tape, because I remember the machine on those years are very slow, load and save, and sometimes you receive a tape error loading. It's not easy, and also it's hard to modify or to add a line and the code. It's really, really hard work. Yeah.
It was, because every time I'd have to load up the last version of the game that I was writing, and that would take like 10 minutes to to load it in. And
Yes,
then
yes, of course.
I would
Yeah.
have to search through all the code to make this better, to make that better. It's not like you could just go right to it, because like I said earlier, the games are based on one logical loop followed by another logical loop followed by another logical loop. If this, then that. Okay, now you've got that. Now, if this, then those. Then you're on those. And you burrow down about 50 of those to find your mistake, or to find something that wasn't quite working right. Like I still remember one time with the football game that this one play, every time you tried it, would lose 5 yards, no matter what you did. And it literally took me like 2 weeks to burrow down to the if then loop that controlled that. So yes, it was tedious, but it was also a hobby, so I didn't mind.
Great history. Thank you for sharing with us. Really appreciate your comments.
Yeah, I hate to sound like an expert on programming, because I'm not.
No, we're
Okay.
not.
Thank you, Steve.
Not looking for that. It's just cool to hear other folks talk about their experiences. So
Yeah,
Yeah, I
well,
mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go
no,
ahead,
no,
Ryan.
go on. You were
I mean,
saying,
I remember like, I was working on, I forget what it was, like probably like on Saturday or something. Started coding on it, and all you can see is the one screen at a time, right?
yeah.
And I had the printer, but it gets to be late afternoon and wrapping it up. Maybe I forgot to eat or whatever, and get kind of done. Okay, saved it. You probably save it 2-3 times and say a prayer, and then
Yeah.
you
And
and
where
then you
did you
print it
save it? Where would you save it?
on the cassette tape.
Oh, see, what I can't remember is, when did I get a cassette tape to start saving? I
Pretty
don't know.
hard otherwise.
Say what?
Pretty hard otherwise, because you didn't really have
Yeah, because
anything
you had
unless.
1K, of course. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
So well,
So this is
I had more
1982.
than that.
So that was 3 years after I built the computer. 2 years. Yeah, so I had a cassette deck that saved everything, right?
Yeah.
But
So
it was
but
not
also would print it out, because I did have the printer, and
right.
so I said okay, list, and it just kept printing and printing and printing, and I
know.
realized, I had this giant printout, and I realized, like, at that moment, because I just worked on it all day, that listing was in my head, because I knew where everything was, and that was pretty, but I could only see a little window at a time. And then, of course, knowing that days later it would all evaporate, and so all I would have is the listing and hopefully a copy on cassette.
Wow. Yeah. So true. I just have a lot of fond memories of building the Timex and just learning to program in BASIC. I have a lot of good memories of that time. Then it got to the point, 10 years later where you really had to be a whiz to program. And I am not a whiz. There's no way. But so in a way, the Timex, the simplicity of it was perfect for me.
I think that was the case for lots of us, where basically what Ryan's saying, it was simple enough that you could almost hold the entire program in your head.
Yep.
If you're looking at just a little window of it.
That and Sinclair Basic was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't bad. I mean, as long as you were willing to write 150 if-thens.
Well, also
down
for sort of, what do you want to say? Simple things. So sure, it's not that capable, but maybe you weren't trying to reach for the stars or something. You
Right.
just wanted to do a little something. And so like now, aside from also pulling all my old programs off the cassette tapes to have those again, then using the emulators to have, sort of an enhanced version, because now I could save to a virtual tape and it's fast and all of that. It makes programming on it, a little bit nicer than it was back in the day.
Yeah. Well, of course, I didn't know any better back then, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I argue, at least for me, I just couldn't afford all the extra niceties. So it was, sure, you had disk drives. Well, that's, that was pretty much a luxury for me. And so
you had
being
to
able
walk
to come.
You had to walk to school in the snow,
Both ways.
carrying without a disk drive.
Without a disk drive, yes.
Yeah, well, but that was different because I was interested in the programming. All my friends, they had Apple IIs and disk drives.
Wow.
Well, not all of them, but they just had a box full of games. They weren't programming on those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I think sort of to summarize why I mean, this is going to sound a little far-fetched, but when I was in high school, my grades were not very good. And I took a math class that was algebra.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked that the teacher said, by the way, there's one A in the whole class, and it's Steve North. And I almost fell out. I almost died because I was never good grade wise. And I was never good after that. I couldn't handle what comes after algebra again.
I don't know, calculus maybe?
Yeah, calculus and all that.
Well, geometry and things, yeah.
Yeah, so algebra was so logical, and BASIC is logical. It's very simple. Like I said, if then, if not that. And so my brain could work that way. And that's also why I couldn't keep programming, because then the calculus guys stepped in and all that.
Well, but I would argue that, between algebra, maybe some geometry, yeah, and that can go go pretty far in terms of solving ordinary stuff. But a lot of people leave out is sort of logic. Okay, yeah, you got algebra, so you got the math tools, but if you can do the logic parts, well, hey, there's a computer that can then take that and automate the mathematics to solve, and that's an algorithm to do what you need to do. And if you don't need to do, if you're not trying to write some sort of video, or not a video game, but like, pick some giant piece of software, but just something you need to do or entertains you or is does what you need,
Yeah.
then it's achievable. But a lot of the systems now, make it becomes very complicated. But you can still find that kind of programming, like just in some simple Python, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I have a lot of good feelings about the Timex Sinclair because I felt as capable as anyone else on it at the time.
Yeah.
And so, I have a lot of good memories of it.
Yeah.
When programming got more complicated, I don't know. I just couldn't keep doing it. I think I talked to one programmer who, when I did the joke about all my games have a 200 deep if thens that start here and wind down way over here, he told me that a lot of the new programming concepts give you, instead of digging down, it's one choice and it can quickly go sideways and pick the choices.
Right.
And so, so that's all I got, guys.
Steve, that was absolutely fantastic. It was so
good.
cool to hear, you
Well, if
are
any of you
among
want to
us,
try, if any of you want to learn some of the formulas in comedy, order my book. It's like $16 or something.
Well, and it's funny you should mention that, because I remember hearing a story on NPR. As a guy who's a mathematician who did something similar and wrote a computer program to use algorithms to write jokes. And it was, the jokes are terrible. They're really corny, sort of dad jokes.
Oh yeah.
But it was really I think it was an entree to talking about artificial intelligence and what makes humor and how difficult it is to.
Yeah, you can't go at humor like an if then.
Right.
But there are formulas.
Well, and he grew up as a sort of the way he described it as a kid, kind of like many of us did, where we found this logical device that let us do things and explore worlds of programming and stuff, and he sort of really latched on to that very algorithmic world, and was even doing terrible math jokes then.
Yeah, I mean, when we were starting out, it was like, our goal was pretty much we're gonna write Space Invaders for the TRS-80.
Right.
What do we have to do to make that happen? And so then that's sort of the thing that gets you into, we got to learn some logic, we got to learn this thing called BASIC, and we got to learn a little math, and we're like, okay, that's what we got to do. And then you may never get to actually writing Space Invaders, but you you learned a lot along the way.
Right.
There's also a correlation between fiddling with a computer program and getting every little detail right and every little thing right, so that one time the runner gets 100-yard gain, and the next time he gets a 30-yard loss. That you balance everything and try to make it as close to real life as you can, so that it really feels random. And there was a random calculator in that software, as I remember. There was, and what was I going for there?
Well, I was going to say to that I could call that that basically that was a football simulation, right?
Simulation, right? Yeah.
Yeah, guess what I do for a living?
What do you do?
Simulation. So
What,
You know,
what?
these simulation. So these can
Oh,
lead
cool.
to,
Uh,
but what I was going to say about that really was like just sort of more of a general programming thing, which is, you know, if you can get a computer to do it, you know, you really understand the problem.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And if
that's
you,
true.
and sometimes it's you don't understand the problem yet, and you write the program in order to understand it.
Yeah. So, and in my business, which I've been doing now for, wow, probably 30 or 40 years, you fool around with little things in the setup or the punchline or the lead in that literally can take a joke or a piece of material that is not funny and it make it hysterically funny. There's just these little chinches that you do, just like in programming. And so there's a similarity there in a weird way. Except in comedy, you're trying to do things that don't make sense. But to make them not make sense, you have to first know what sense is, and then you have to play with the forces that create that. I mean, what I tell everybody, like I coach people all over the world in comedy, and one of the first things I tell them is, look, if you want to get better, you go to a psychiatrist. Comedy makes you do the opposite. It makes you worse. I don't know why I'm talking about comedy to you guys, but anyway, that's what's. I still feel there's a similarity between fooling around with just this word or that word in a setup compared to just doing the same thing in programming.
I think for most
Right.
people, using a 40-year-old computer is pretty comical.
You're always trying to hit that sweet spot.
Uh-huh.
Whether you're programming, it doesn't matter what you do. It's not to this, it's not to that. It's just right there, and getting the right balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Cool.
and so I'm sorry that
No,
he's not
Steve,
around anymore, because he was a kind of a fun guy.
yeah, from what I understand, Fred was a pretty interesting guy. You know, I mean, he
Was,
really
yeah.
did a lot of stuff, and he really, helped preserve
he
the
ever
community,
disclose-
through the 80s. I'm sorry,
Did
what,
he
Paul?
ever disclose the real reasons why he was afraid to come back to the US?
No, not that I'm aware of.
He hit a rough spot, and he was afraid if he did come to the US that Canada wouldn't let him back.
Well, what did he do?
I don't know.
Okay.
He discussed the tribulations of do I go or do I not, but not the real reason
Yeah,
why.
that fits his personality. Yeah. He had a little bit of a wild streak in him. But that made him really easy to work with. Like, he didn't, like, a lot of places they want to tinker around with, can you make it more this way, or can you make it more this way, or I believe that a good game should be this. He just said, I love your games, I'm not going to mess with them. Just put them right out there.
Just put 'em right out there. That's cool.
That's a rare person that knows to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I thought they were mighty complimentary when I did that one game contest they sponsored,
Good.
and that was interesting.
Oh, you're talking about when Sinkware did a game contest? Okay.
Sinclair did
programming.
a game contest.
Yeah, programming contest.
Oh,
I think he meant Sinkware, the magazine that
Sinkware News.
yeah, that Fred started. Sorry. Let's have a senior
Right.
moment.
So unfortunately I have to go.
Okay. Well, Steve, thank you for joining us. Thank you for
I had great fun talking to you guys, and
good.
it's great that you're keeping this thing going. It's making me want to go back and find the original programming that I had, and
There you go.
yeah.
Yeah. And then you can come back and join us and tell us about the next program you've written. You don't have to do it with that terrible keyboard anymore. You can use emulators now.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. Sure. All right. That'll be about 3 years from now.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, guys. Nice seeing all of you.
Yeah. Cool. All right, gentlemen. Tim, you've been busy.
A little bit. So
So-
I've actually, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, tell us what you're trying to accomplish, because the teaser sounded tantalizing.
But that's for the next issue of ZX Zine.
Cool.
So I'll probably leave it there because I don't want to spoil. Because I've got most of the articles written. I did talk to David about adding some stuff. I think you said there's some other articles that didn't go into some of the other newsletters that could go.
Yep.
So I need to look into that.
Yep.
So, and then I've got another side project that is actually a game, but not a video game. That's the one I'm writing in C. That I first start off by doing the math for it, doing all the math routines I had to do. And now I'm doing more of the game playing stuff and kind of, write some code. Oh, I gotta figure this out. Sit down, figure it out on paper. Okay, go write some code. Oh, can figure out some more on paper. So it's getting there, but it may take a little bit longer to eventually get done. I'm hoping it doesn't go beyond 16K, but we'll see.
Are you doing
Yeah,
this in
it will.
Z88 DK?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you're writing in C and going to compile it to
The 81, yep.
Okay. Cool.
So
Cool.
I
Now
think
you're really
it's one that
teasing
you will
us.
probably like.
Now you're really teasing us, Tim.
Yes. I guess it's still, I mean, I sat not working on it for a while, but now I'm kind of back into it. I'm trying to, it's all a matter of, what's the right word? Feeling the moment kind of thing, where like sometimes like, okay, I'm just tired, I don't want to do anything. And then like, oh. Like today I start working on one thing and I'll get it. Well, I'll work on like 2 or 3 things at the same time because I get interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'll ask one quick question to the group here because I've been digging into it. Is there an easy way to pass a variable to the floating point calculator stack? Because ZX Basic, the compiler for the Spectrum/2068, won't print out floating point numbers. So I thought if I can get a floating point to the stack, there's that ROM routine that does take the thing with something on the top of the stack and print it out. So I thought if you entered a number, so let A equals a number, that went on the floating point stack, but I think it just goes under the vars variable stack and not the floating point stack. So that's kind of my quandary at the moment.
At least the address of the variable is in the is it called vars?
Right. Now this would be on the 2068. So but I did look at vars, but I thought it would also go on the stack. So I want a quick and easy way to get something for debate. So to get around the bug, I want to basically
dest.
Okay.
If you say let A equal something, then the dest variable is set. But you have to be careful because if you try to do anything in basic to try to grab that, that sets the variable again. So you have to do it in machine code.
Right. No, but I thought it went onto the float. I thought it went onto the calculator stack. It looks like it doesn't. I thought about looking into fixing the bug. I thought about looking at fixing the bug, but I found that the assembly that comes out of ZX Basic isn't all that great. It's easy to read. And if I run with no auto run, it crashes, whereas if I do it with auto run, it sometimes works. I had it say let A equals 3.14, and I had it print out A. I got 3139999 out that, I'm like, oh, it's just 314. So there's definitely a problem with ZX Basic and floating point numbers. So still trying to, because it's a decent little compiler, but a lot of what I want to do requires floating point. So it's kind of frustrating. It's broken. And so far, no one seems to know it. It's on their board for that software. No one's brought it up.
Which compiler?
ZX Basic by Burrell.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The one I ported to the
You-
2068 for the Spectrum.
Gotcha. Yes, yes.
I guess it is more code, but I guess a lot of times I think I recall like people do something like, sort of a fixed point math.
Yeah, I mean, no, it seems to work floating point fine, but just the printing it out crashes it. I mean, it crashes. It goes off the never land. It like doesn't. Sometimes it does it wrong, but if you turn off the auto run, boom, it is just hoses the machine.
Is it maybe that you have to, that there's something else it's expecting when you call that particular routine to be in place? It
Just
isn't
the print
there.
statement. I'll go relook and see if maybe there's some, because there is some differences between ZX Basic and Sinclair Basic, such as the input won't work directly. It's a
Mhm.
different type of input. And a few other commands that are different. I don't think I read anything about floating point being. In fact, I remember seeing in so the author some years ago posted to the Sinclair ZX world about how to handle floating point because he's having problems. So maybe he never did figure it out. I don't know. So that's one thing I've been working with. Just started working on it today a bit. So
Cool.
I've got a very faint recollection that might have been something addressed in the original in a Timex 1000 code when Tom Bent went through it.
no, this is for the 2068. And again, it's only with this particular compiler. So I don't think it's a ROM issue. I think it's a compiler issue.
Shortcoming in the compiler.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I thought his assembly, because I'll make a look at it again and just have it, because it'll generate an ASM file, but it was pretty verbose. And it's Python, so I'm like I can really troubleshoot very well. So, but I'm continuing to look into it. Still thinking about it.
Okay. Okay. Jeff Burrell, you there?
Yeah.
Since you've done most of the work in the past week or so, 2 weeks, I guess. You want to talk about where you've gotten to, where you and Ricardo and Gustavo have gotten to with the Pico?
Oh, sure. The storage.
If you want to show anything, your video's off.
I forget who knows about what.
Right. Well, start from the top is Ricardo started working on this device based on the Raspberry Pi Pico, which is incredibly small. I have one in my hands and it's maybe 3/4 of an inch by 2 inches long. He started working on a storage device based on this thing and interfaced it to his 2068 and did some programming, and then hooked up with Gustavo, who had to leave early today. And Gustavo did some programming in the tiny bit of remaining space in the XROM to support Gustavo's work with the Pico. And then at some point in the not too distant past, Tim 2 from New Zealand, and Jeff, you got pulled into the project as well. And then a month and a half ago, I feel like, Jeff, you started working on implementing Gustavo's circuit board, and then it started getting really hot and heavy.
Yes. So, just a second. Let me share my screen here.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a photo of the mass storage board that Ricardo and Gustavo had been working on for quite a while. And Tim Horton in New Zealand had been helping them, but he got snowed under in work. So I decided to jump in and simply, get the boards laid out and off to people. So essentially, what the system does is it uses a Pico to do all the heavy lifting for file management. And right now the files are stored in the Pico's onboard flash. However, just today I was talking to Ricardo, and he got his 2 boards, and he's going to start looking into communicating with the SD card and using it for file storage, which will make life a whole bunch simpler. But essentially the Pico, excuse me, the Pico communicates directly with the 2068 bus and allows you to use some, I think, very well constructed commands from Gustavo's library of original commands
Yeah.
to read and write, get directories. And I've actually used the board enough so that I know that you can write programs from the 2068. You can read them back, run them, do all sorts of neat stuff. The board, right now, this board is shown with only the flash populated, and Ricardo and I were working on getting the SRAM implemented as well. That is now working. So those of you who might want to run CPM or just have extra RAM hanging around for RAM disks or whatever, that is available as well. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now. Essentially, the hardware work is done. I think David, most of the software development is pretty much finished, I think, at least for the initial release. Is
I
that
think
correct?
so, yeah.
So in fairly short order, we should have a native solution for storage on the TS 2068.
And if you're a person who has another device, like say a disk drive system that uses the bank enable line, which a lot of systems used, to sort of, take over the 2068. You can see that this thing looks like a cartridge. There's a back plane with slots that this can plug into, and that back plane has some special jumpers on it, so that if you plug this into it and an old style disk drive system, like say JLO, the JLO can take over the can operate as normal, or an Airco or something else. That's one of the things that Jeff and Ricardo and Gustavo did a lot of time, working on, was making sure that it was somewhat backwards compatible. And as just said, the progress is happening. Still shooting for November. One of us is going to have to write documentation. That would be me.
This is an example of one of the storage boards and the back plane that David was just talking about.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's all pretty clean and simple and easy to use, which is pretty nice. Hey Willie,
Yo,
you want to talk a little bit about your boards that you cloned?
the GMO stuff.
The GLOs, yeah, because I've gotten to a certain point with them, where I've gotten to the point in the I plug them into my system, they recognize commands. I don't have a disk drive hooked up to the system yet, because I need the little tiny power connector, not the big Molex connector. I've got one on order.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I cloned John's system, and it works really well. I was able to clone both boards and his printer interface and all that stuff. So those will be available sometime here, huh?
You keep on, Ralph's really sick too.
Those will be available here. I'm working with Dave to kind of get them on his website. We were just figuring out what actual cost was, so on putting those things together. So, but they're working really well. The printer interface works great. One thing I like about it, if you have a Centronics printer, you know, all the commands are built into the JLO safe DOS, so you don't have to load any special drivers or nothing. It's kind of neat. I've been using one for a long time.
Well, and it supports several different kinds of Centronics printer.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like the Olivetti is one, but nobody has the Olivetti anymore. But,
There's
Epson and some others.
probably 7 or 8 different brands that are built into it.
Yeah.
All the popular ones back in the day, of course, but I basically, I think I'm running Star, yeah. And it just emulates a Gemini, so it basically runs, I just use the Gemini interface and it works fine with the Star printer, but it's kind of neat. I mean, it's I print stuff on that dot matrix printer, and it's, you know, to hear that sound is just kind of brings back a lot of memories back in the day. But now my kids look at it like, what in the world?
Well,
so it's kind of interesting.
So Willie, it looks like you're like in a sort of side room on your house, right? I mean, the big toolbox drawers and stuff.
Yeah,
you know, suggest a workshop.
I do a lot of tinkering in here, and I work on stereos and stuff like that sometimes. So
okay.
repair electronics, but the Timex 2068 is just really my hobby, I guess, one of my big hobbies, and I just really like that system, and I hope to someday to learn the machine code part. So, but haven't really got into that far yet, but I still have fun with the basic enough to keep me motivated. So
yeah. Shoot, I lost my train of thought. Oh, so you mentioned the printer making a noise that makes your kids wonder what that is. I have a 5 1/4 inch drive that I think Paul sent me, and because I have no case for it, it's not sitting in a case with rubber feet, and so I put it sometimes I put it directly on my desk, and the head seeking noise gets amplified by the desk. And so whenever I'm archiving discs, they're like, what is that noise? Like, oh, I'll put a little book underneath it.
That's interesting. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do, and I'm working for Dave to help me here. It's a little bit over my head, but we're trying to get the GoTech floppy interface to work with the JLO, which if we do, I mean, that's going to be awesome, because then I can just use a thumb drive to store everything. I don't have to have all these floppies around, but I still have all the functionality that I have now. Plus, moving between the two medias is really easy, I'm hoping. But what I thought was interesting was the newer GoTechs that you get, they have a speaker in them so that it sounds like a floppy disk is working, which I thought was pretty weird, but it's kind of neat. But yeah, it's actually got a little speaker in it that makes it sound like a floppy is working when you're trying to access a floppy disk. So I thought that was pretty neat.
What was the market share of the different 2068 disk systems?
I know the answer to this question.
Yeah, I don't know. I know the Larkin was really popular, and of course JLO was for a little while, but I don't know who the biggest one was, but I'd say Larkin was probably up there. There's a lot of people still have those, but as I'm finding more and more, there's still several people that uses the JLO stuff too. So to me, it's just one of the easiest ones to use, where I think with the Larkin, you can actually dive into different track stuff with it. There was a lot of utilities written for the Larkin that they're not for the JLO. I mean, you could do But I mean, the Larkin had to have a boot, kind of a boot system where the JLO does and everything's stored on the EEPROM,
Mhm.
as far as operating system. It doesn't use any memory or anything to format disk. It's all uses the internal storage of the JLO, where the other systems use a little chunk of memory whenever they're doing a format or anything like that for disk systems. I know the Arco did, the Arkin did, and I'm not sure
So,
what Zebra had, but
so Jeff, the answer to your question is Update Magazine had asked this question. And when they asked the question, they had, it looks, if I'm reading my notes here correctly, they had about 500 subscribers, 238 people responded. So 47% reported having a JLO, 47% reported having a Larkin, 19% the Airco, 8% the Zebra, and then 4% was this thing called the Ramex, which was I think it was wafer drives, but 30% reported having a dual DOS operating system. So, as they say, not everything adds up to 100%.
Yeah, I was adding that up mentally, and when I hit about 130%, I thought,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so like Willie said, I'm encouraging him to make more of these things so that folks who want that kind of thing available can have that. And obviously I've been working with the Pico guys for a while, and our goal is to have that available in November, because this November is the 40th anniversary of the launch of our little silver computer. And then we have a few months, and then we go into a period of mourning in February.
I'm glad you guys made it backwards compatible, but I mean, that's very exciting to me what you guys are doing. So even if it wasn't, I'd still have one, but or get one. But it is neat to know that I'll be able to use both systems.
Well,
So,
and so when we were working on that idea, that we had you in mind, Willie, we know Willie has a JLO, but he's probably going to want one of these things. And what he's going to want is to be able to transfer stuff, from the disk to, to the Pico. And we also had in mind, actually, at that time, we had in mind Neil Cohen, who had a really big system with both Larkin and JLO disk systems, and unfortunately Neil passed away. Was it
yeah.
this past late spring, unfortunately, so we did not get there in time for Neil.
can the Larkin and the JLO systems coexist at the same time?
So
Yeah, you can actually,
yeah,
in fact, you can there's a Larkin cartridge that has Larkin DOS or something on
Yep.
it. It's called. You
Yep.
can plug that cartridge in the 2068 and actually use the Larkin commands to operate your disk system with the JLO.
yeah,
Oh,
So yeah, you can do. They do coexist. You can do some things together. In fact, Neil that he was mentioning that passed away on us, me and him were talking quite a bit, and he had both systems, and one of his tasks was being able to. I put a switch on his Larkin cartridge so that he could disable the cartridge while he had both systems running, because he was swapping between the two. And all you had to do was flip the switch to turn the cartridge back on when he wanted to use his Larkin system. And that's what he was doing. He was taking things that I forget who, but somebody gave him a ton of Larkin disk, and he was transferring a lot of that stuff over to the GLO. And
Yeah.
that's how he was doing it. Was was running both systems simultaneously.
Hmm.
Pretty neat.
Yeah. Paul, at
Yo.
one point in time, you were compiling disks of public domain software for the Sinclair North America user group project. Do you remember doing that?
A little bit, but
Okay.
that got forwarded to the main
Yep.
cheeses that were running the group.
Yep.
So I did it and then passed it on.
So here's the interesting thing. Frank Davis must have had, got copies from you in some way, right? At some point. Because Paul Anderson ended up with a bunch of stuff that came from Frank. And one of those was Frank's 1500, and it has a little Dymo tape on the bottom that says Frank Davis. But what Paul also had was a box full of Larkin discs, and so not Larkin, Oliger discs, and so I in the past several weeks figured out how to. I used my grease weasel to read the discs into image files, and then started digging into the directory structure and figuring out how the files are stored on the disk. And a bunch of those discs are discs that you compiled. I thought that was pretty crazy that they've, made it full circle somehow.
Well, the last thing I remember involving that group was the payback portion.
Yeah, I remember reading a note in maybe in Circ Live Alive or something about that, about how
I had to order a new batch of checks because of that. There were a bunch of people that got reimbursed.
Yeah. So, I'm kind of curious. How did you get pulled into that project?
I don't remember anymore. Mel, I knew Mel a little bit.
Okay. And so for people who don't know, Mel Nathanson, Mel was in Florida, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Mel was in Florida. There was a um there was a convention held in Florida in like 1988, I think. And out of that convention came this idea of a national user group. And the proposed name was Sinclair North America User Group, or SNUG. And the Mel was really good about getting the idea out. Like he wrote to, I think, all the user groups and all the newsletters and stuff. And many of those newsletters, those places, published his letter, and and then some follow-ups from him. But organizing anything on that sort of scale would be really difficult. I mean, you had CompuServe, we had CompuServe back then, we had email, but not like we have today, where it's just really easy to send stuff back and forth. It doesn't cost a dime. CompuServe was not cheap. And so I think progress was kind of, it sounded like progress was a little slow. Is that a fair statement, Paul?
Yes. That's a polite phrasing.
Okay. Well, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus.
Well, a lot of people were interested.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't you be? Because user groups, local user groups were sort of fading out, as people stopped attending and stuff. And so at some point, the idea was, let's build a public domain library as a feature of the user group. And somehow you got tapped to do that.
Well, I had access to a lot of floppies.
Oh, okay.
Where I worked, I was a technician, inside technician. And if the equipment at work needed updating
Yeah.
and it was disk-based, every installation got their own set.
Yeah.
And they were updated often enough that one set would supersede another relatively soon. So there were a lot of surplus disks that they decided, rather than trashing, that.
These AT&T discs.
In Timex sleeves.
I think
Okay.
Now,
I
when
got a
they
few of those.
advanced to the 3.5s, they also had Timex sleeves for the 3.5s.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's crazy.
I thought so too.
Well, I knew that these were yours because I recognized, that public domain software project. And then I also
Well, I was at the time, I was the US representative for the software library for Quanta, which was the QL side.
yeah. And how did that go?
It went okay, except for a couple of people tried to cheat the system, and I got called out on it because I caught them. And they passed the job on to somebody else rather unannounced.
Okay.
But
That's-
I think whoever was trying to cheat the system complained. And
So Paul got around quite a bit.
Oh my Lord.
well, there you go.
That looked awfully familiar when you put that up, Dave. So
Yes.
I knew I had some.
That's hilarious.
And who knows how old these are.
Well, about 40 years is probably how old they are.
Based on these are going to be the data is probably from the mid 90s, based upon the labels.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Because I used them on my QL.
5 1/4?
Oh, wait a second. No, actually, no. These probably were QL based because one says archive. One actually might be CPM. I'm not too sure. Probably more likely QL.
Well,
I
I got to
can't
the
remember when I
point
went
where I was
from-
doing both sizes. But for home use, I was using the 5 1/4.
Yeah, because I went from 5 1/4 to 3.5, but I don't remember exactly when I did that. I think I went straight to ED drives from 5 1/4. I can't remember. I remember having ED in my last batch of drives. And those were great.
Was that the higher density 5 1/4?
Yeah,
Or was it
No,
2.
3.5.
So they were 2.88 meg for DOS, but they were 3 meg for QL.
Okay. And were they 2.8?
3.5.
3.5? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3. But they're mini hard drives for a QL. Imagine what they'd be like on a 2068.
Yeah, right. Store the entire.
You only need one.
Oh, you only need one. Yeah, very true. Cool.
Well, I'll tell you what, Willie,
Yo,
I've got a couple of the extra boards left over from the cartridge slot project for the 2068. If you want those, when we get together, I'll bring them.
yeah, that'd be
Hey,
great. Yeah. Cool.
Paul, are you talking about these RAM cartridge boards?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have documentation for these things?
I did have, I will have to look and see if I still do.
Okay. Because Tim is going to try to reverse engineer it and come up with a new schematic. Tim 2 rather. I have a couple of the boards and I've got parts coming so that I can try to build, but I have one of them fully built.
Okay. Yeah, with both sockets populated.
Yeah, with both sockets populated.
Good
But I would
deal.
love to see what the documentation says, and especially if it has any examples.
Because I think I was using the RAM board to run Hot Z.
You were also using the RAM board to write your bulletin board.
Yes, I did.
I found that article on one of the discs that you had written. As a matter of fact, it's on the website now. That you had written about, you had bought one of these things and held on to it for a while and didn't quite understand how to use it, but then one day you had this sort of epiphany and figured it out, and you're like, I'm gonna go off and do these things, and you wrote an article about it. I put that on the website, so if you want to.
Okay.
I thought that was a fun little piece of writing you did. But yeah, if you have the documentation for those things, let's get that up because I want to make these available to folks.
Well, the next time I scrounge through those boxes, I'll pay attention to that hunt.
Okay, cool.
What was I going to say? Well, so I was good. I had decided, like, okay, I'm going to get back and get back on modifying quick font.
Yeah,
because I had a few things that I had done, but I hadn't got them in there properly, and I was trying some crazy machine code thing that was not working for some reason. But as it always happens when I go back to do one of these things, what I decided what I needed to do was like, well, okay, I kind of wanted to move to where the source is in text file, and I use emakebase to take it over into the emulator. And as always seems to happen, I did that. So what I need to do is make sure that I can generate the one I got from the source. And so I'm listing the basic into a text file, looking that over and saying, okay, run emakebase. And I get a thing that loads up and it would say, it would give me some error. I'm like, oh, great. I think it was the usual nonsense in basic.
Nonsense base, yes.
But as usual, yeah, when I want to go to do a thing that involves emakebase, then I got to go and fix emakebase because it's another bug. So the bug was, it was kind of like the last one I fixed. I guess it was a different case that I didn't catch where it could happen, which was basically it forgets to put the floating point number in. And it's because the emakebase, at least that I've gone and cloned, is not, I guess, is it Tim? Someone's got some older version.
Maybe Tim.
I think is it just an 81? Anyway, it's a lot simpler one. This one's trying to do things for Spectrum Next and some other stuff. So it's got all these things and this lot, and it's trying to still do the ZX81. So previously I was fixing all the ZX81 bugs because apparently no one was using it for that and didn't realize it was all broken. Well, it wasn't all broken, but there was several broken pieces. But and it just falls out from like, okay, you got all this logic to do this or that, you got all these cases, and you go to add a feature and you break another one because there's not really great test suite, which I hope to get in there. But yeah, it was like the Spectrum Next has some thing where you can put literal hex and binary, which I guess I don't know why because you had the bin keyword, but they still have what is it @ and you can do binary memory, $sign and a hex number. And the parser in those cases it says, oh, that's Spectrum Next, don't add the floating point bytes after it. And it was triggering that, so it wouldn't add them in. And it turns out it was because of the way it was parsing numbers to begin with. And so finally fixed that. So that was my latest big thing. So I guess maybe the PSA takeaway here is keep an eye out for recent build of
CMake base.
the ZMake base, especially, I forget the number, where it is. What is it?
I seem to recall it's like a 1.7 or something,
I
right?
think 1.8.5,
Okay.
which I haven't looked to see if either Chris Y or Tim has built recent versions. And unfortunately, I can't build anything other than the Raspberry Pi ones right now. But anyway, so yeah, if you go and grab one, it may not be as recent. Certainly, if you get it from some archive.
Okay.
Anyway, and as far as other thoughts, I mean, I guess I was trying to keep track of all this recent hardware
Uh-huh.
talk and development, and I know Carl was mentioning it maybe last time or something. But what I was going to say to Carl was that as we know that there, you said earlier, you referred that there were lots of activity in the Spectrum world that was preserving a lot of things and also creating new hardware. But then, as we've come to learn, that not a lot of love on the 2068 front, which we've been doing various things more recently.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the hardware differences, it's actually, a real issue. And I know Carl has long had his idea of he wants to recreate that hero picture of the 2068 system, if you recall, right? And I think, part of that, it got me thinking like, well, what we kind of touched on it maybe last time where we talking about like, okay, we could put several things together, serial interface and whatnot. But I mean, because that part of that's really what that expansion unit was.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think it's supposed to have the microdrive interface, Centronics interface. I don't know about a serial, but certainly the modem connection.
Yeah.
Or well, it's probably just on the bus. But anyway, it just occurred to me, like, well, yeah, is it worth kicking that idea down the road a little bit farther of like, I don't know that anyone else is really going to be doing it.
Well,
and that could we just say, okay, let's start coming up with a spec for what that might be. And we kind of touched on it with like sort of the expansion card stuff of like, okay, what if you had something maybe it's turns out it's more akin to the TI expansion box.
Oh, the peripheral expansion box, yeah.
Something would house that card where you can plug several in, possibly. I don't know. I'm thinking something that's a little less Rube Goldberg looking. Maybe that's what I'm saying.
Well, you'd have to institute some kind of specs then. You'd have to.
Yeah, I know.
Which is not impossible. It's just a thought.
The idea of like, should we maybe start to get a little bit more serious about that kind of thing? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and to my mind, part of, I get what Carl's after with that, recreating the photo. Part of that is finding a box to put it in, and I don't know that we would necessarily find, something as nicely done as what.
Oh yeah, I don't mean necessarily. I guess what I'm getting at is not necessarily literally what Carl's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there was ever, even the photo doesn't really hint that there's actually much there. It's always seemed to me like, oh, it had some clever little stand,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But I guess, I guess what I'm saying about that there is, it could be a little different, something more potentially more practical, I suppose.
Okay.
Um, and I'm still trying to understand, like the card with the Pico thing. That's kind of intriguing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I need to get some time to better understand what's going on there. Of like, oh, interesting. Like, does that mean like you could do, more things like that? Because I guess, I know we have all slightly different views on the retro aspect of things. And so, like taking Carl's vision as an example, part of that is sort of realizing the system, but part of like what I always fascinates me is the idea of realizing what the evolution of the system would have been. Like,
Mhm.
could we create something like that? Now, obviously, you don't want to break compatibility a whole lot because we don't have an industry that's going to write new software. So, but yeah, I mean, and adding disk drives, although many decades later, you kind of want to add something faster
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of mass storage. But that's that's an evolution. That's enhancing. So,
So then what about something sort of like, what they did with the Next, where they've got this FPGA, and then they added a bunch of new features.
yeah, so you've
And
got something that's in the style of, but it's I need to understand that too. But that's a good point of like looking at what they did and like say, well, okay, is there something, do you pick something middle of the road, like, okay, it's something that enhances existing hardware, or do you go like they did with, new hardware,
right.
which obviously makes some of that job easier, but
Right.
um,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
not. But I mean, there are all kinds of crazy stuff in the past, like how many systems had the thing where you plug in some new thing and it was like an accelerator, right?
Yep.
That kind of stuff.
Yep.
But obviously we're so far from it in time now that we have sort of different needs.
Yeah.
And so the idea of having the thing, I guess maybe that was sort of the idea of the Pico, was like, well, yeah, but that thing can talk to the internet,
Mm-hmm.
potentially. So, I was just thinking of like, oh, could I make a little doohickey that, that's why I was playing around with that one interface, one ROM kind of thing of,
Mhm.
could I make a thing that just takes those IO ports and just brings that over to a Raspberry Pi GPIO, and then just make a thing that's talking over that, and then the Raspberry Pi is doing something like file serving to it,
Sure.
and so I just drop files into a folder on this thing and they're accessible.
Mm-hmm. To your point, the shoot. Uh there is that capability in terms of uh certain devices like the Pico, because the Pico has a USB um connector, and when you buy one and you just plug it into your computer, if before you've done anything to it, it shows up as a device, as an SD card device. But then when you install Python on it, it sort of goes away and you have to communicate through another program. But still, you can use that other program to upload files to it, like like it's a file system. And like you said, uh certain Picos have Wi-Fi on them, so yeah, you could talk to the internet directly from your 2068 or, you know, whatever it is that you know want to
Yeah.
use.
But also, I've looked at things like there seem to be several of these projects I've tried to look at where in the past where there's people have made Sinclair Basic interpreters.
Yeah.
So you could kind of use them as like a modern, maybe scripting language, if you will. So you have the feel of the basic, but you can actually write new useful things.
Yeah.
And then of taking something like that and then building something around that potentially.
Yeah. I do remember what I was going to tell you about was somebody has built and I don't remember exactly if it's just a microdrive emulator or if it's a microdrive plus interface 1 emulator in a circuit board that would fit inside a microdrive, but it uses 3 picos. I think it showed up on Hackaday the other day.
Well, I remember their mention of it's a microdrive compatible device that you stick an SD card in or something. Is that the one you're talking about?
So that's a different thing. This is a newer project that somebody.
So I guess that one's for like if you can just replace the unreliable tape doohickey with something that works.
Yes. Yeah. And this is a whole new project. The part that struck me was that it had 3 picos in it, and the like I said, I think it was on Hackaday, and it talked about what each of those 3 picos did. But given that the pico is like $4 or $5, it's not that big a deal. But you're looking to me, the part that was kind of absurd was you've got in essence 3 cell phones worth of CPU power inside this little tiny thing.
But I think and some people will say things like, well, why don't you just use one of the picos as your system? What are you doing here?
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if how many this is true for, but like to me it seems like, okay, well, there's something about, you could call it just the aesthetic if you want, that sort of the essence that I think if you could extract that, like I think maybe that's where more of the Spectrum Next was trying to do. Where like, okay, let's take the essence, but let's not be bound by literally rotting hardware, right? Let's try to get that whatever that look and feel that we enjoy, but like bring it forward to something that's more practically usable.
Yeah.
And sure, the casing goes a long way too. So I don't know. It's just really just a sort of a thing to think about that maybe we could start having conversations on.
Yeah.
Well,
not saying we do like a Spectrum Next, thing necessarily. Just we just come up with like, oh, what would be interesting.
Well, Ryan, you bring up a good point, which is that the retro scene is kind of 2 different things. One is recreating a retro system for yourself, or creating a retro system for yourself that is 1980X, where you have floppy drives and Centronics interfaces and those kind of things. And then on the other hand, there's applying excessive technology to simple problems and bringing the 2068 into the 21st century, either by building more modern hardware. The one problem with floppies is that eventually they fail and die, both the drives and the floppies themselves. So upgrading the old hardware with newer hardware, and then part of that is also, do we build something that's not as ambitious as the Spectrum Next, that doesn't take 12 years to get out? By the way, I'm still waiting for my issue 2. Um, so
Yeah.
that the real question is, what do people want?
Yeah, and I know everybody kind of wants a different thing, and I always knew that, things I want tend to be different than others. So for example, like I said, one of the things that kind of fascinates me in our case, especially, well, ultimately in all the micros cases, is that what would that next machine have been? And we kind of know to some degree, but if and you could say, yeah, but if we literally built that, it would have no software. It's like, well, so what? Right?
Well, and we
if I
could,
just want it to run Manic Miner, I don't need to do anything anymore. I've already got that.
true, but that's kind of where the Spectrum Next makes its bones, because it does have
Yeah.
compatibility, but also brings you forward. So
Yeah.
and it's the
Well,
problem
and
I have.
that's true. Yes, any future system might have had like some reasonable backwards compatibility anyway.
Yeah, and well, given it was Timex, but the point is that I think the Spectrum Next is trying to be too much in
Mhm.
one package. I mean, it's not that difficult to bring the 2068 into, say, the late 80s in terms of technology. Better graphics, more memory, better keyboard, but use modern components to ensure that at least it has some longevity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could have a thing that's just that, like it's better, it's compatible. It's not vintage hardware necessarily. But it'll certainly have that feel, and you could put it in a retro looking case and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you could also, like I say, if I had the existence, say, of an actual Sinclair basic interpreter that had extensions to it, to allow me to do things, if you imagine like adding a library to Python to talk to this or that, or I could just add stuff and I could do modern things with it, but with this feel of that system, but it's all running on like that Pico, but like notably quicker.
Yeah.
And then you give it a vintage, case and keyboard, well, nice one anyway.
Yeah.
And that's another way to go, right? There's all kinds of different ways of doing it. And certainly, but that's that whole other direction other than this one direction where like, okay, let's make some things to connect to the existing vintage hardware that bring that forward some.
Yeah.
I think all of these things can be interesting. And so, it's, I guess you could think of it like, okay, is this just, what's that one where, well, no, I think, well, like you could just say something. I think it's Ingo, right? He was doing that little Z80 machine on his own.
Yep.
It could even be something like that. And then we just say, okay, yeah, well, let's do this with the bus and expansion notions. We're just making like, just occurred to me, like, because one of the things to me about 1982 was like, there were different systems every couple of weeks coming out, and almost none of them were compatible with each other,
Yeah.
right? And it didn't matter, right? At the time, the idea that, yeah, it's just another Z80 6502 box with maybe another Microsoft Basic, who knows, have at it, and that was fine. And so to me, a whole other project is just, hey, yeah, let's just make that. Only it's, it's like yet another crazy system.
A year later or 2 years later. Yeah. Like Jeff was saying, with better features and whatnot. But I like your idea, Ryan, of somehow extending, having the option of extending the basic in, sort of maybe a sideways or parallel direction where you can add on commands or make it run some Python code somewhere else.
Yeah, like if you could get, like, imagine, like right now, if you're trying to do anything, your limit. I mean, sure, I know the limitations can be, kind of the fun, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
or the inspiration because you're trying to get around them. So, also the idea of purposely making a system with limitations people will forcibly try to get around is an interesting one as well. But that you say, yeah, but we're ultimately limited by this, like say the 64K address space,
Yeah.
kind of, sort of, but not really, but it's very complicated to do. And just say, well, what if that all just lives in like a system where, okay, they find a way to make that where now, okay, yep, you've got 640K.
Right,
Woo.
right. But to your point, yeah. So Ryan, I mean, what you're saying is
and you virtualize it in a newer body,
yeah, yeah,
in some way, I guess, is a way of thinking about it, but that has very much the same feel, but it feels like, yeah, some evolution. Just as an interesting project. I don't know if that's something, but as you say, Spectrum Next is a lot of that. I'd probably have one if I weren't too lazy to try to get hold of one.
Let's talk about this some more at our
But
next.
yeah, I don't want to keep us. I know you wanted to keep
seriously.
us.
I mean, I love this. I love this thread. Let's talk about this some more at our next meeting. Let's try to bring some ideas, to our next meeting about what a thing like that could be. What could its feature set be? What could it potentially look like? How can it behave?
Just like as an example, like, on my computer here, I can pretend, because it's a Pi 400, right? It's really the evolution of a Sinclair in this body here, and then the basic is just a thing that just comes up in a window. So I pretend like when I fire a fuse, it's just an instance of the basic, right?
Yep.
And so then start to use that to imagine, like, yeah, what if it kind of kept evolving? And so, yeah, the basic is just a windowed app amongst many other things going on.
Right.
Well, what would that aesthetic be like?
Mm-hmm. Right. What would that experience be? Yeah.
Anyway,
let's talk about this in 2 weeks at our next meeting on Sunday. Yeah, I'd love to hear some more. Do some more brainstorming. That's your assignment, everybody. Think about what you would like, or what you would imagine the next iteration of a Timex Sinclair computer would have been.
If I may plant a seed,
Yes.
remember the KISS principle.
Yeah, there's that. Exactly. Right. So we have to balance it out. Exactly. What you said, pal. We have
well, and that's a good point, because the very next one, because remember, these things depends on how you want to play the game, right? The very next one would have been like some, modest increment potentially.
Right.
Unlike the 2068 one.
Right. And we have this advantage of 40 years of time span and technological advance. And so,
but what I mean is that to what he was saying is that first thing could be some sort of modest increase.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to play it as a game, you say, well, okay, we only want to achieve this. We're not necessarily going to look decades ahead, right? Because no one did, right?
Yeah, right.
And so they were just thinking about, oh, how can we get 64K in it, by the end of the year, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, things changed, and yeah, it's kind of because I said the word game, that just suddenly made game. It almost made me think of like a role-playing game of like, okay, what if you wanted to just sort of like, hey, let's actually pretend to be the Timex engineers and let's come out with next year's model and as a fun thing to do. Well, it might take us 3 years, but
It might. Okay, so everybody, that's your assignment.
So let's go back and fix all the problems with existing ROM.
There you go. Right, right. That's a thing. Okay.
Wasn't
Uh,
finished,
just-
so why not?
Why not?
Just scrap-
Exactly.
nah, just scrap it, start over.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, let's go blue sky and then let's talk about what's reasonable. You know, there's a you know, everything, and then there's time.
And speaking as an ex-product development engineer, we
Right.
also, well, no, we also need to have a reasonable price point for this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was forgetting to mention that, right? Because it was like, yeah, this is fun, but how much do I want to spend on it?
So
You
right.
wait
This is
until
the
Micro Center has the Raspberry Pi W's on sale again for $5.
exactly right.
That's
So
yeah. So kind of the one idea was like, yeah, the temptation to just make this all software that's running on a Raspberry Pi is pretty tempting.
it
Then
is.
it's just an emulator, like we already have emulators. So
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
Alright,
yeah, yeah, just write it as an emulator for a fictitious machine.
All right,
well, I
gentlemen.
mean, what I like about the emulators is I can put so many on a small little netbook I've got and have, 10 or 15 different machines if I wanted to.
Yeah,
all,
that's very true.
all on, or different emulators for the same machine, all on the same platform. Whether I'm running on DOS box or running on native Linux natively, there's so many options there. All on this. I mean, 1 second. I mean, this is my primary machine for doing retro work.
Oh,
It's just a
yeah.
little 11-inch netbook that sits on my lap on my recliner, and it's I'll put it back up again. It's just an Asus book, but it's not very big, but it's great, and it works crappy for browsing the web. It locks up, but doing retro work perfectly fine. Runs everything just great. Runs not as fast as my main desktop, but fast enough for everything I need.
Yeah.
So
All right. Let's do this. Let's do this on Sunday. We will see you in 2 weeks hence.
Well, sayonara.
Good night, gentlemen.
Good evening, guys.